All right, so in today's video, we'll be looking at public choice theory. Public choice theory. All right. These are the key topics that we'll cover in the public choice theory video. Now, we'll look at what public choice is. I mean, the various definitions of public choice, and then the rules of public decision making. Then we'll look at voting and then direct democracy, Arrow's impossibility theorem, the concept of cycling, and then the voting paradox. Then unanimity and then the majority rules of voting. We'll also discuss that, and then the spectrum of the voting decision rules. So these are the key topics that we cover. All right, basically, when we talk about public choice theory, one definition is that it's just the theory that studies how the decisions to allocate resources and then redistribute income are made through a nation's political system. Okay, so if you take any nation's political system, how does the political system allocate the scarce resources that we have so that they can efficiently produce the goods and services that will ultimately meet the needs or the wants of the people? And also, how does this political system redistribute income? How will income, for example, be taken from the poor, from the rich, and then given to the poor? So the branch of economics that studies all this, how the political system will allocate the resources and then how the redistribution of income will occur, is what we call the public choice theory. Another definition too is that it is a study of the process through which government policies are determined and then implemented. So before any government policy can be actually executed, it has to go through processes. So the branch of economics that studies these processes is what we call the public choice theory. So how would the economy determine the particular goods and services that are supposed to be produced, and then how would these goods and services actually be produced? So that is another definition. And then another one to say is that is a field the field of public choice examines how a political process is used to determine the quantity of goods and services supplied by the government. Okay, so here too, it looks at the volume of goods and the services that will be produced by the government. Okay, so if you take the political system, what are the processes that the political system goes through so that we're able to get the optimum quantity of goods and services that the entire nation wants? So basically, all the definitions are talking about how government policies are enacted, how are they executed. It talks about how the goods and services that the citizens of a nation needs, how are these goods and services produced? Okay, how are these goods and services produced? And then how would the political system cater for the less privileged in the society? So basically, that is what public choice theory is about, how the various goods and services that are needed, okay, for societal welfare, for societal benefits, are actually produced through the political system. Okay, according to Muller, he defines public choice as the economic study of non-market decision making, or simply it's just the application of economics to political science. Okay, so how does economics affect the political system? Okay, so basically this is what public choice is about. So given this definition, we can say that public choice is not just for a particular course. It's not just economics. Okay, it is interdisciplinary. Okay, we are combining political science. We are combining what economics before we can actually know the goods and services that are supposed to be produced in any economy. So public choice is the combination of economics and then political science. All right, so the subject matter of public choice is one, the theory of the state, the various voting rules that we have, voter behavior, how do voters actually behave, especially towards election, and then policy making, party policy, politics, and then the bureaucracy that comes with the political system. The bureaucracy that comes with the political system. All right, so we begin with the method of collective decision making. We just look at the sample definitions of public choice. So how is collective decision making done in any political system? Talking about collective decision making, there is a decision making that is not made by just one person or just a group of people in the society, but we are talking about taking decisions, okay, based on or taking into consideration the general welfare of other people living in the economy. For example, if you take the unanimity rule, for such a voting rule, almost we need the agreement of all the people that are involved, all the people that are affected by the policy in question. That's why we are calling it collective. Okay, so what are the types of collective decision making that we have? We'll be looking at a few of them. Okay, all right, now I want to take public choices. Okay, we want to enact a policy, we want to produce a particular public good or service. Okay, most of the times the choice making is done through elections. It is done through elections where each individual, any individual that is affected by the policy is allowed to vote only once. Okay, the person is allowed to vote only once. So this voting that we are talking about is able to reveal the individual's preferences concerning the public rules or whatever action, whatever collective action that the state or the nation wants to take. So you vote to actually reveal your preference. Maybe assuming the voting is between the implementation of a policy out of two policies. So you are able to review which policy you actually prefer. Okay, if it's in terms of goods and services, probably we have more public goods that can be produced, but we vote to actually review which of those particular public goods that we want. Okay, so through voting, the individuals that are affected or that engage in the voting process are able to review their preferences and also to determine the amount of public expenditure. So if we are able to vote, then we are voting towards the implementation of a policy or the production of a particular public good. So we will determine the amount of money that the nation or the state will have to use to produce these public goods or services. Okay. Now, assuming you are a voter, and we assume the rationality of the voter. Okay. Now, we'll try to review our preferences through the voting, as we just said. So through the voting, what is going to be the outcome, the voting outcome, what we call the political outcome? We want to produce a certain quantity of a public good. Okay, so we try to review our preferences up to the point where our tax share, you the voter, the tax share that you are going to pay for the implementation or the production of that good is exactly equal to the marginal benefit that you derive from that good. So you will vote, or you actually prefer a particular quantity of a public good when the tax share, your personal tax share, okay, the amount of or the proportion of the public expenditure that you pay will exactly be equal to the marginal benefit that you get from that particular good. Remember, in economics, we think in margins. Okay, so I am going to vote in favor or against the production of a particular good. So me voting for that good to be produced, I will choose a particular quantity where the proportion of the tax or the proportion of the public expenditure that I am going to pay is exactly the same as the marginal benefit that I am getting from that good. Okay, so at that point, we say that the voter, in other words, is in equilibrium. Okay, where the marginal benefit is exactly equal to the tax share. Okay, it's equal to the tax share. So you, the voter or the individual, you try to vote for a particular output level. Okay, you try to vote for a particular quantity of that good or service if you know it is going to give you your maximum possible satisfaction. You want to help produce this good because of the benefit, the satisfaction, the utility that you are going to get from this particular good or service. So you choose this quantity that in your own mind, by your own understanding, is going to give you the maximum satisfaction. Okay, so we all do that. We all try to choose a particular quantity that will help us get the highest benefit that we can get from that public. So if you look at this, let's look at the tax share versus the marginal benefit. This straight line here, the TI, is a tax share for individual I. Okay, so you are going to produce a particular output. There's a particular public expenditure to that quantity of output that can be produced. So your tax share that you want to produce should be equal to, this is the marginal benefit. Okay, this is the marginal benefit. The curve, this is the marginal benefit curve. Now, the vertical axis is measuring the tax, and then the horizontal is measuring what? The quantity. Okay, the vertical is for tax, and then the horizontal is for the quantity. All right, so just as I said earlier, the individual voter will vote for a particular quantity where the tax share is exactly equal to what? The marginal benefit. So at point Z, the tax share is exactly equal to the marginal benefit. So this individual will vote for quantity Q star. Okay, will vote for quantity Q star. All right, let's look at the rational voter model. The rational voter model. Now, if you are a rational person, a rational voter, okay, and your voting decision, okay, whether you vote for a particular quantity A or quantity B, would depend on, one, the cost of voting, two, the benefit that you are going to get from engaging in that voting process. So your decision to vote will definitely depend on the cost that you are going to incur, okay, as you vote. One, and then two, the benefit that you expect from what? From voting. And then there's a third factor, that is the probability that when you engage in the voting process, you actually anticipate this benefit that you are expecting from you voting. So your voting decision depends on the cost of voting, the benefit of voting, and the probability that you are actually going to get the benefit after you have participated in the voting process. So before you vote, you have to consider these factors before you engage in any economic or political voting. Okay, now, why do people actually vote? According to Downs 1957, it could be considered irrational for people to vote. Okay, it can be considered irrational. According to Downs, it cannot be considered rational to vote. Okay, so when you are voting, you'll be considered as an irrational person. Yet people vote. A lot of people vote. Why? Okay, now we all know that we consume or we engage in any activity because of the expected utility from that activity. So if you take, for example, the consumption of a particular good, we consume because of the benefit, the utility that we get from the good. And we expect to get a positive utility from consuming a good. So in a case where the expected utility from consuming a particular good is negative, then you don't have to consume the good at all. Okay, you don't get any benefit, so don't consume the good at all. Here, what we are trying to say here is that whatever voting decision that you make should reflect the benefit, the utility that you get from engaging in that voting process. But then most of the times the expected utility that we get from voting is negative. So if it's negative, just like any other commodity, if the utility is negative, you don't have to consume. So if the expected utility that we are getting from voting is negative, then we shouldn't vote at all. Yet people vote. So this gives rise to what we call the voting paradox. Okay, the expected utility from voting is negative, yet people are still engaging in this voting process. So it's like in economics, when you're getting a negative utility, you don't have to consume. But then here, people are getting negative utility, but they are voting. So what is actually going on? What actually can we use to explain this? Okay, why do we still vote even though we are getting a negative utility? So in the next pages, we'll try to answer or explain this paradox. How exactly do people vote even though they are getting a negative utility? So let's dive into the rational voter theory. Okay, now assuming there's this particular policy called X, okay, that we are going to vote on. Okay, this policy is called X. Now each voter will calculate the value of that policy being what in. Now whenever they enact that policy, what is the expected utility that this individual, this voter, is going to get? Let's measure that by UX. Okay, so UX is the utility that you get from policy X being implemented. Okay, now after you have calculated your expected utility or the utility that you get from that particular policy, you also need to calculate the probability. We are representing that probability by P, that your vote will actually be decisive. It being decisive means that it will make a difference in the outcome of the election. Okay, you are engaging in a voting process. You are not the only voter. We have other voters as well. So what is the probability that just your vote? And remember, we said during the voting process, most of the times people are allowed to vote only once. So you voting once, just that your one vote. What is the probability that is actually going to make a difference? Is it actually going to affect the outcome of the election, whether policy X will be enacted or not? So this probability, like all other probabilities, will be restricted between the range of 0 and then 1. Okay, between 0 and then 1. Now, the value of P, that's the probability that your vote is actually going to make a difference to the outcome of the election, shows the size of the electorate. It shows, or it gives a picture of the number of voters. Okay, and then how tight the election can be. Okay, how tight the election can be. Now, if we assume that all the voters are rational, we are assuming, this is a stronger assumption, we are assuming that all the voters are rational. If they are all rational, then we approximate P to be of this value. Okay, P should be equal to this value that we have here. Now, P is the probability that your vote is going to be decisive, or your vote is actually going to make a difference to the outcome of the election. N is the size of the electorate, so the number of voters that are going to partake in this electoral process. And then the Q talks about the voters' expectations of the proportion of votes that each party or policy is likely to receive. So if you take Ghana's political system, most of the times the election is between MPP and then NDC. So the Q is going to measure the voters' expectation of the proportion of the total votes that either MPP or NDC is going to get. Okay, so now if you take this formula that we have here, P will be a very large number. That is, it will be almost like 1 if Q is greater than or equal to half. Okay, and remember we said that the P there is talking about how tight the election can be. Okay, how tight the election can be. So the higher the value of P, then the more tight the election was or the election will be. And we are saying that P becomes largest when Q is greater than or equal to 0, and then N is very small. See, if the number of people that are engaging in the voting process are very small, then yes, your vote will more likely be decisive. If the number of people engaging in the voting process are not many, then it means that your voting will actually count. But assuming you have like 1 billion people voting on a particular policy, I mean, how can your single vote be decisive? Okay, so P becomes very large when 1, N is small, and then 2, the expectations or the proportion of votes that each party is likely to receive is greater than or equal to half. Okay. All right, let's look at the expected utility of voting. Okay, what is the expected utility? The utility that the voter expects from engaging in the voting process. Now, whenever you engage in any economic activity, remember there is a cost. So there's also a cost to voting. One of the costs is the time that you spend, okay, considering the various alternatives, and then the likely impact on the voter. Now, you want to vote, okay, there's a voting process concerning a particular policy. That is not the only policy that we have. There are other alternatives. So the time that you spend thinking about all these alternatives is also considered as a cost, because you are using your time there. And not just that, you also have to be considering the impact after we undergo the voting. If the policy is actually implemented, what are the impacts that the voter is actually going to have? I mean, what will be the impact of the policy on the voter? So this, all these things are time consuming. So you are sacrificing your time. So it is seen as a cost there. And then when you are going to vote, to at times look at the queues that you have to join and all that. There too, it is time you are using. There's an opportunity cost to that. You could have used that time to do a different thing. So that is another cost. Another associated cost. Even there are some countries where voting can even result in death or injuries. All these things are costs. If you don't take your time, you go and vote, and then you will not be taking your arms or your legs home. So all this, there are other trivial costs that we can also think of. Okay, so that is the cost of voting and other stuffs. Now, if you want to find the expected utility from voting, then this voter will have to combine the benefit or the gains that you get from voting, and then you consider the cost of voting as well. So the expected utility from voting is equal to 1, the probability times what? The utility that you get from that, how do we call it? That particular policy, X. Okay, now just remember P, this probability here is the probability that your vote is actually going to be decisive. Okay, so that probability times the utility that you are getting from voting minus the cost of voting, that is going to be your expected utility. Okay, so you subtract the cost from the probability times the utility that you actually get from policy X. Okay, so that is the expected utility. Now, what we need to understand here is that most of the times we have quite a number of people engaging in this election process. So it is not very likely for one single voter to actually affect the outcome of the election. The vote of just one electorate cannot actually affect the. So what we mean is that a single voter's vote cannot be decisive. Okay, it cannot actually affect the outcome of the election or the voting, and as a result, P will be very small. Remember, P is the probability that your vote is going to be decisive. So if we are assuming that because we have quite a number of people engaging in the voting process, and as a result, no single vote can actually change the outcome of the election, then it means that P is going to be very small. Okay, P is going to be very small. So if P is very small, it will make the P times the UX a very small number. Okay, but then we have cost. The cost is always positive, which means that the expected utility is going to be negative. Okay, the cost is going to be greater than the benefit that you get from voting. This is the reason why we are saying it is irrational to vote. Your expected utility from the voting is negative. The probability of your vote being decisive is very small. So a very small number times your utility is going to be very small, but the cost is there. Apparently, the cost of voting is not a joke at all. So now subtracting this big cost from this small utility or benefit is going to give us a negative value, which means that the expected utility of voting is going to be negative. And if you are engaging in an economic activity and the expected utility is negative, we expect you not to engage in the activity at all. So if the expected utility from voting is negative, then why should you vote? Yet people vote. That is where the paradox of voting comes in. So it is considered irrational for people to vote, yet they do vote. Okay, yet they do vote. Now, this rational voter model normally works with countries that use the majority voting system, where your party or the policy is actually going to win when it gets a majority of the votes. Okay, when it gets a majority of the votes. All right, so how do we explain the voting paradox? How do we explain the voting paradox? Now we have seen that the expected utility from voting is negative, yet people vote. So why do people still vote? One explanation is the minimax strategy. Okay, minimax strategy. What is this strategy about? What it says is that now people engage in voting not because of the expected utility that they are actually going to get. That is not the case, but they vote just to minimize their regret of not voting. If I don't vote and then someone votes for a particular policy that will negatively affect me, then I am going to regret not voting at all. And as a result, let me vote. I am not voting to actually maximize the benefit that I'm going to get from the voting. So there's one reason why, even though the person knows that he's getting a negative expected utility from the voting, he will still vote so that there won't be any regrets after the voting. Let's look at the scenario. Assuming we have two states, state S1 and then S2. Now, in state S1, even if you vote in that state, it won't make any impact at all. Your vote won't be decisive at all. But then in state 2, your vote is decisive. It's going to have an impact. Now, let's use this table to examine the value of regret associated with voting in both states. So we have state 1, state 2. Then it's either you vote or you abstain from voting. Now, if you take state 1, okay, if you take state 1, the outcome of this voting is independent of the voter's strategy. Whether you vote or you don't vote, they just don't care because your vote won't make any impact in the outcome. So what this means is that if you actually vote, you are going to have a regret of voting because you have wasted your time to think about alternatives. You've wasted your time to join queues, all the other costs of voting you have incurred. And you voted and then your vote made no impact. So you are going to have a regret which is equal to the cost of what? Of voting, which is C. So when you vote in state 1, where your vote has no impact, you incur a cost of what? C. But if you abstain because you knew that your vote wasn't going to make any impact, you don't have any regrets from not voting. So in a state where you know that your vote wouldn't make any impact at all, it's better you abstain. So don't vote at all, because if you vote, you rather regret. But if you go to state 2, okay, if you take state 2, your vote is very decisive. Okay, your vote is very decisive. So there's going to be no regret with voting, because you know that your vote is actually decisive. Even if you vote and your policy doesn't come to power, or your party that doesn't come to power, they don't go for your policy, you will have no regret at all, because you know that your vote actually made an impact. But if you don't vote at all, just know that you have sacrificed the utility that you were supposed to actually get from the voting. So one, you didn't vote, so you have sacrificed that utility. You have sacrificed that utility, and then whatever cost that was involved in the voting. So in the state where your vote will actually make an impact, when you abstain from voting, okay, the regret that you have there is going to be your utility minus the cost of what? The cost of voting. Now, you didn't vote, okay, so your regret was going to be the amount of utility. So just assuming that you were expecting to get a utility of 10 from voting. Oh no, this 10. Let me write this. The utility that you were expecting to get was 10. Assuming you vote, you have a cost of what? You incur a cost of 5. Okay. Now, I didn't vote at all, so I have sacrificed this amount. Okay, my regret here is 10. But just know that I didn't vote, so I didn't incur this cost. So I will subtract this cost from this utility. So my total regret here is going to be 5. Okay, it's going to be 5. I didn't vote, so I didn't incur that cost. But then because I didn't vote, I will have to sacrifice the benefit that I was going to get from the voting. So your regret there is going to be the utility that you could have gotten from voting minus the cost of voting. Okay, minus the cost of voting. So people actually vote. So now, if you look at the second state where your vote will actually make an impact, then it's better you don't abstain. If you don't vote, you have a regret of this amount, you minus C. But if you vote, there's no regret at all. So even though I know that I am going to get a negative expected utility, let me still vote, just to make sure that I don't incur this regret of U minus C. So this is one explanation of the paradox. There are other explanations as well. Okay, this is the explanation of the table. The other explanations are the ethical voter theory. Now, people too vote because of altruism. They vote not for their own benefit, but for the benefit of others. So, for example, you can take a rich man. There's a policy, a tax policy that is going to take income from the rich and give it to the poor. The rich man knows that if this policy is enacted, it is going to go against him, yet he will vote for that particular policy. Now, because the tax policy is going to take income from the rich man, the expected utility for the rich man is negative. So he wasn't supposed to vote, but he is voting not for his own benefit, but for the benefit of others. You see why, even though the person will be getting a negative externality, yet he will engage a negative utility, yet you still vote. Okay, so that is one explanation of the voting paradox. Another one too is that individuals derive utility from voting. We see voting to be our civic rights. Okay, it's our duty to vote. So we feel like, yes, let me exercise my right. Let me exercise my right. Okay, so we vote just to make sure that we are protecting our rights. And also, in any democratic setting, we have to vote. So we are voting to preserve the democracy that we have, and we also vote to express our political preference. You see, at times there's this prestige with associating yourself with a particular political party. So I am voting for MPP. I'm voting for NDC because I want to express my political preference. I want people to know that yes, this is the party that I support. And others to see voting as a social activity, so they don't want to take themselves out. And another explanation too is because of some ideologies that the voter has. The person knows that he's getting a negative externality, but maybe the person has some idea that no, I can't take myself out of voting. I have to vote. So the person will still engage in the voting. So now, if you look at these things, altruism and all that, because I know my voting can actually help someone, then it's going to increase the likelihood that the expected utility that I am getting from the voting is actually non-negative. It's going to be greater than zero. It is going to be greater than zero. I know that I am voting to help someone. So if the vote can actually help other people, then yes, I have achieved my motive. So I have gained what I wanted, which means that the voting will now become a rational activity. Okay, so these are some of the explanations to solve the voting paradox. Okay. Let's look at democracy. Okay, democracy. We normally see democracy as a channel for resource allocation. Here, democracy is seen in two ways: direct democracy and then the representative democracy. Okay. Now, if we talk about the direct democracy, we are talking about the case where the social choices, the quantity of goods and services that must be produced, those policies, the policies that we go for, are determined directly by the citizens. Okay, so the entire citizens will determine the policy that must be implemented, the quantity of goods and services that must be produced using a particular voting procedure. Okay, so whenever I talk about direct democracy, then it means that all the people living in the country or the nation will participate in deciding on which policy to go for, which public goods should we actually produce, what quantity should we produce. But then they do this, they undergo this decision-making process through a voting procedure. Okay, through a voting procedure. So these are some of the voting procedures, okay, under direct democracy. There's unanimity rule, and then the majority voting rule. Under majority voting, we have the simple majority and then the qualified majority. Then we also look at log rolling, okay, or vote trading. Okay. So today we'll look at the unanimity rule, and then next video we'll look at the majority rule. All right, let's start with the unanimity rule. Okay, this is a voting procedure where there's supposed to be a unanimous agreement between all the people that are affected by that particular policy. Okay, now we want to embark on a particular political policy or economic policy. Well, we want to produce a particular public good. The quantity that we want to produce, all these things, all the citizens, all the people that are affected by this policy must come into agreement that this is the quantity that we want, this is the policy that we want, before they can actually embark on the policy. Okay, so you see how direct this is, all the people involved. Now, this rule was actually propounded by Lindau, okay, Lindau, and these are the assumptions for this rule. First, we have to determine the total amount of public expenditure and taxes. Okay, what is the total amount of money that we need to produce that public good, to produce that particular quantity of the government good that we want to produce, and the taxes that the individuals will have to pay. So first, we have to determine the total public expenditure, the amount of funds that we need. Then second, we determine the allocation of this amount of money, these funds, these resources. We determine how they are going to be allocated for all these goods and services that we want to produce, just to make sure that the goods and services are being efficiently produced and they are being able to satisfy the wants of the society. So assuming the public expenditure is 20,000, we have 10 goods and services we have to produce. How do we allocate them? We need to determine that. How much is going to good A, how much is going to good B? We need to determine all this. And then the last one too, now we need to be able to share the public expenditure or the taxes among the people that are going to be affected by the policy. So first, make sure you know the total expenditure or tax revenue that we need, know how to allocate this expenditure, I mean, among the goods and services that must be produced, and then know how to share these taxes among the individuals that will be affected by the policy, okay, by the policy. All right, now this rule is based on the benefit principle and then the ability to pay principle. So you pay based on how much you can actually pay and then the benefit that you are getting from that particular good. Okay, so we want to produce a particular quantity. What is the benefit that I'm getting from that quantity that is being produced? What is my ability to pay? Okay, what is the amount of money that I can actually use to support this public good? Now let's see how this this procedure works. Let's assume we have two people, okay, Adam and then Eve, and then the government is trying to get a unanimous decision from these two people to produce a street light. Now we also assume that Adam and Eve will share the cost of the provision of the street light. So whatever cost that the government incurs is going to be shared by Adam and Eve in the form of taxes, of course. Now let's use SA to denote Adam's share of the cost of provision. So after they have provided the street light, SA is talking about the proportion of the cost of the street light that is going to be borne by Adam. Okay. Now, for any particular value of SA, that is any particular value of tax share for Adam, okay, you would demand a particular quantity of street light. Now, if Adam wants to pay 20% of the total cost, there's a particular quantity of street light that Adam will need. If Adam wants to pay 30%, then there's a particular quantity of street light that he's going to demand. Now, whenever there's an increase in his tax share, it means that the cost of the street light is becoming too expensive for him. If he has to pay, like initially he was paying 60%, so he was demanding like 20 units of the street light. Now they are telling him that he has to pay 80%. See that his tax share is increasing, and as a result, he will not be willing to demand for more of the street light. So whenever there's an increase in the tax share, there's a reduction in the demand for the street light. So the figure that we are about to look at is going to show the relationship between Adam's tax share, okay, and then the quantity of the street lights that he will demand. Now, this is the diagram. If we take the vertical axis, okay, that one is measuring the tax share for Adam, and then the horizontal one is talking about the quantity of street light that Adam is going to demand. So this is his demand curve for this particular street light, and it's giving, or it is showing us the relationship between the tax share and then the quantity of what, of street light. Now, for Adam, his tax share starts from 0. Okay, it starts from 0 here. So as it is increasing, it means that there's an increase in his tax share. And I'm sure you can see that as it is increasing, he will be reducing the quantity of the street lights that he demands. Okay, so the DA, as I said, is the demand curve for this street light. Okay, and Adam will demand less whenever there's an increase in the tax share. And then if you take Eve, this is the demand curve for Eve. But for Eve, her tax share starts from 0 prime. Okay, it starts from 0 prime, and it increases as we actually move down. Okay, as we are moving down the vertical axis, then Eve's tax share will be increasing. So the demand curve is upward sloping, which means that whilst we are moving down, the tax share is increasing, and as a result, you'll be reducing the quantity of street light that she will demand. But as we are moving up, the tax share decreases, so she will be willing to demand for more units of the street light. Now, when you add the tax share of Adam and that of Eve, you have to get 1. Okay, they are proportions. So when you add the two, you have to what? You have to get 1. So based on the unanimity rule, this particular quantity of street light, R star, will be produced, because this is the point where the two demand curves are meeting. Okay, so at S star, this is Adam is willing to pay 0 S star, and then Eve is willing to pay what? 0 prime S star. Okay, so these are the tax shares that these two people are willing to pay, and they've come into agreement that these are the tax shares that we want to actually pay. Okay, so if we are actually paying this, then this is the quantity that we all want. So this is just for the case of 2 people. So what if we have thousands of people, millions of people? How do we actually get to this? I mean, in the real world, it wouldn't be easy at all. Okay. Now, the tax shares that they pay, we call them the Lindalian or the Lindau prices of the public good. So if you look at this, Adam is paying OS star, that is the Lindau price for Adam, and then O prime S star is the Lindau price for Eve. Okay, the Lindau price for Eve. So we get the equilibrium at what? At this point, here, and at this point, they produce the quantity R star. Okay, the quantity R star. Now, if you look at the question here, is this rule very feasible in the real world? I mean, it won't be at all. So these are the limitations, the criticisms. Now, the rule is assuming that even if you take just Adam and Eve, you see that the rule is based on the benefit principle. Okay, so we expect that people who vote sincerely, they will actually review their true benefit, the benefit that they actually get from the vote, and it's also based on the ability to pay. So they have to review that this is the amount that I can actually afford. So the rule is assuming that people will act sincerely, but that is not the case. We even have free riders who will understate their benefits so that they can actually pay less or even not pay anything at all. But after the public good has been produced, they will actually enjoy. Okay, so this thing doesn't really work in the real world. It's possible that people wouldn't be as sincere as the new things. And also, just assuming we have a lot of people, I mean, how do all these people come into agreement concerning the tax share? It is really going to be very difficult and time consuming, which means that the decision making is going to be too expensive. How do you gather? Let's take a country like Ghana. We want to use this route to produce a particular good. Let's take this e-levy for example. If we're all supposed to come into agreement, it will take more than 50 years. before all the people can actually express their preferences. Okay, so this is the rule, the unanimity rule, and then its limitations. In the next video, we'll look at the majority voting